It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. My guest today is my friend, Dr. Clementine Fujimura. She's an anthropologist at the U.S. Naval Academy. She's also the coordinator of area studies there, professor of anthropology, critical cyberculture studies, intercultural communication, Russian and German. Thank you, Clementine, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
First, I have this definition of anthropology, but it's better to hear it from an anthropologist. Can you explain it?
Sure. Well, there are different subfields of anthropology. I myself am interested in cultural anthropology, and so I'm interested in how in culture, that is the way, sort of the system of behaviors, beliefs, and values and symbols that are passed down from generations, and that do change over time. So I'm interested in that system, and that's what I study.
Which brings us to why I'm talking to you today. Anthropology in the broader sense, defined as the scientific study of humans, human behavior, societies, current and in the past. No matter which direction you look, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's our divisions over political and social issues, our world is changing.
Yep, and specifically now, I think some of the behaviors that are forced upon us seem counterintuitive to us, but they're actually cultural, right? We can look around into other societies where some of the behaviors that we are now practicing have been practiced for a long time. For example, the mask. But for us, it seems there's so much symbolic meaning to this mask, and that's changing over time throughout COVID. So it is a cultural phenomenon that we're going through.
You don't have a crystal ball. But I do want to know how our world is going to be changed once we're past the pandemic, once there is a vaccination or that we've all developed herd immunity or however it's going to happen, that COVID-19 will no longer be an issue. After the 1918 flu pandemic, which sometimes called the Spanish flu, which killed 50 million people worldwide, it's estimated, 675,000 people in the United States alone. That was 1918 to 1920, and then you saw the roaring 20s roar in with flappers, with lots of drinking and partying and drug running and nonstop craziness until the stock market crashed in 1929. You think we're going to see that again once we're past all this?
I'm skeptical about that because I think this is a different time and we have different technological capabilities, but I do think there will be reactions once we can definitely say that COVID-19 has passed. And I do think there will be changes in our culture that are going to be long-lasting and make us, in some sense, more adaptable, hopefully. But on the other hand, will there be some kind of a popular culture resurgence? I think that will, of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can imagine that the kinds of things we're interested in and the kinds of things we'll be doing will be a reaction to COVID-19. I think of, again, in terms of culture, looking at behaviors, values, and symbols, I see certain behaviors as changing. For example, after the TB outbreak in the 1800s, spitting stopped, sharing of cups stopped, and actually they wanted to stop handshakes, but handshakes was not socialized in schools, whereas the end of handshakes, whereas spitting and sharing cups was. So how we continue to raise our children and to carry on traditions from COVID will have to be seen. But the handshake is one of those that's fraught with social meaning. It demonstrates trust between people, two people. But over time, will we become more casual about this hygiene practice? I don't know. I can imagine that certainly social distancing might be something that we can think of as a good thing. So will we go crazy and party? I don't know. I do think, though, that the social isolation, while we won't have a today COVID is over kind of boundary, over time we will want to get out and do some things we weren't able to do and seek some adventure. But I think social distancing is something we might always be wary about. But this is again just a guess because, we've seen that COVID is something we don't see. We can't see it happening. So it'll take us some time to feel comfortable and trust large gatherings again.
it's an invisible enemy.
Yeah, right. Some of the effects of previous illnesses, for example, in China, some of or if we look at the SARS outbreak there, people are still carrying, the face masks in their purses. I've heard that they still carry toothpicks to push buttons on elevators even after that passed. So I can imagine carrying my face mask for a while, and it might be interesting also how architecture and how we design space might change. That's always something that fascinates me. I mean, how space, the way we design it, reflects our values and our beliefs. So I could imagine larger gaps between tables in restaurants, or how we place things, in a room, how we organize people and space might be one of those things that might change over time as well. So I'm actually really excited about education. How are the school classrooms? How are they going to maintain some social distancing for a while? Because again, when is COVID-19 going to be officially over? Will there be a date when they say, and today we can all sit close together again? Right?
We can go into Times Square and kiss each other in the middle of Times Square, right?
Exactly. And that's the other thing, the trust that we have. There's this idea of being in the in-group and the out-group. So like the idea of, okay, I'll trust my family, we'll hug again, but will I hug after I meet someone for the first time? Sometimes very quickly we say goodbye and hug the person, and that's our society, or maybe I shouldn't be and shouldn't have been, and how quickly will I ever do that again? So that has to do with trust issues. How can we trust that someone's safe? Because we can't see that darn virus. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of changing of space, I was just watching a show about or a story about the changing of restrooms, the change to even toilets where you have a plume. So toilet manufacturers are trying to change things. The manufacturers of stalls are trying to change things. Everything will no touching of anything, including the button to flush the toilets, which you still see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is all very interesting. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. I'm talking to my friend Dr. Clementine Fujimura. She's an anthropologist. She's a professor at the Naval Academy. We're talking about how the world might change post-COVID-19. You were speaking about education, the changes to education. I have a kid getting ready to go off to college. You do have a kid at the Naval Academy, and one that is already done. Mm-hmm. And you are teaching at the Naval Academy. How has all this changed for you?
Well, for me personally, it was, we were thrust into this in March, and I had never taught an online course before, so I felt it was a little bit risky to put me on, Zoom and have me teach something effectively. I was surprised at how well it went, considering that I still believe that there's, being in the classroom with the students, the eye contact between students is almost as important as the eye contact you maintain with your students. So I felt the ability for students to interact was definitely hampered. However, we were able to have successful chats and conversations. We were able to, every year I take my students to Gallaudet in my anthropology course, and that's a big part for them to learn about deaf culture. I was concerned that we couldn't have this field trip, and yet we did a virtual tour of Gallaudet, and we had a wonderful tour guide who had an interpreter, and the students came away excited. Some of them are determined to visit the campus as soon as they can. So it was very successful from that perspective, but there were things that were lacking and things that I look forward to being back in the classroom again, ultimately.
So the things that were lacking was that one-on-one between the students developing
body language. So, for example, you can't read body language via Zoom like you can in a classroom. How the students are responding. I could guess a little bit, but they couldn't interact with each other. So sometimes, for example, every class you'll have that one or those couple of students who are the jokesters, who are making jokes, and that has a lot to do with their being able to roll their eyes and other students being able to respond, me to react somewhat and not embarrass myself completely if you're not getting the joke. But a lot of that has to do with body language, and those moments were just lost. And it builds a certain communitas, a sense of community when you have that body language, the kinesic relationship as well as the verbal relationship. The communication that occurs on all those levels is so complex and yet so important to a strong classroom dynamic, I think. That was lost on Zoom. On the other hand, we did the best we could, and we all had a sense of humor about it. I asked for more feedback than usual throughout the semester because I was worried that I wasn't reading them accurately. The students were great. I mean, they just really rallied and did a great job, but it was effort. Also sitting, my gosh, sitting as an instructor for that many hours is hard. You know, you move when you're in a classroom, and I make my students get up and move. So that, again, it's much more dynamic when you're in the classroom, just instead of sitting in front of a screen. So I wonder how well, I mean, I can't even imagine how teachers do this with, younger students whose attention span is limited. So, I don't think it's ideal, but I do think we've learned that for students with special needs or students who can't make it to class because they're sick one day, oh, well, maybe we could record this. Maybe our technology is now, we really tested it in a way that it might be productive post-COVID. And even just the idea of, working remotely was usually thought of as something, well, they're just probably lazy, or they don't want to come to work. Or now we might see that actually in some ways it might be more efficient. People are able to just get right up and go to work and not worry about the commute and the traffic. So in some ways our technology has proven itself to be very helpful and allow us to be more resourceful in how we engage at work as well as at home.
Now, one of your areas of focus has been PTSD, right?
Yes, veterans specifically.
And what you found something interesting during this period of time. Share that.
Yeah, so what's interesting is they were on this internet communication and building community through cyber cultures. They were on that way before, I was really involved. And so when COVID happened, I asked them, I said, the people I'm working with, I said, how has COVID changed your life? And they said, not much. I'm still, my communities are online, and that's where I feel the source of empowerment. I feel safe. They're there for me 24/7. They have their groups. Some of these veteran communities are very structured in how they interact with each other. That is, they have people looking out for each other, asking in the morning, how have you survived the night? How are you ready for the weekend? Because these downtimes are times when people are most vulnerable who suffer from PTSD because they don't have anyone to turn to. And the sense of community and people who know you and understand you and are there for you have been around for longer than I even knew.
We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. I'm talking today with Dr. Clementine Fujimura. She's an anthropologist right here in Annapolis. She teaches at the U.S. Naval Academy. So we were just talking about how the veterans with PTSD had already started, long before COVID, building communities on the Internet and finding one another on the Internet and helping one another out and being one another's cheerleaders. But there is this whole other group out there, the young people. There's a concern for young people that this could really have some added horrible effect on some young people with staying at home, with social distancing. Tell me about your feelings as an anthropologist about that.
Well, yes, I think we promised our children when they were born, from the day they were born, that there were stages that they would go through. They'd go through school, they'd meet lots of friends, they'd find their social groups, and socializing among peers is a big part of what we value in our culture. Networking, and again, even physical touch, is something that I think is lacking on the Internet, or completely absent. So I feel like I wonder how young people today who feel, it's a cultural thing that we promise them this. Other societies deal with, youth in different ways. Some go straight to work. There's not this period of college when you can explore. But we promised our students and our kids these opportunities to explore and be socially engaged. And now that's suddenly gone. And I think there is in as much shock as we are, and we don't have an answer for them. We don't know the roadmap for them. We know that what the expectations are gone. So the social expectation of what it means to be of a certain age and go off to college, all those things are suddenly gone. So that tradition, that ritual of growing up is taken away. And for once, we don't have the answers either. So we're all left in this void. And the kids are going to have to figure it out, and we have to be strong for them. But how this is going to play out really depends, I think, on how long this will last and what other opportunities we can give them that involve social distancing, for example.
What are your sons doing for socialization right now?
Right. The one at the academy, the Naval Academy is very invested in creating a bubble that is a space within which a midshipman can interact freely, but within that space. So they're not allowed to go off the yard at all. And I think, and yard by that I mean campus.
Right.
So it's very difficult. I think there's a concern on my end for their emotional and mental capacity to just be in a jail-like situation, even though they're trying to loosen up in other ways. If you were able to go onto the campus now, you'd see some midshipmen in hammocks, for example, something that was unheard of pre-COVID, but allowing them some freedoms on the campus that they didn't have.
There are hammocks on the yard currently?
Yes, there are hammocks currently on the yard.
What do you know?
Downtime. I know. Who knew? Well, also, tourists are coming in the yard, so there's the appearances are perhaps less important. So yes, they're giving them a little bit of leisure. That being said, it's not a lot. There are no crazy parties going on. There's no partying at all, as far as I can tell, going on. Not that needs to be essential, but this idea of socializing freely, being allowed to go. These guys and girls were told, hey, you're 18, you're an adult now, and no, you can't go downtown. No, you can't go out. You can't even go to a supermarket for that matter. So that lack of autonomy that's suddenly taken away from them when exactly the opposite had been promised to them. Again, the military, a little bit less perhaps, but
right.
Still on weekends, on leave time. It's a new way of understanding who they are as midshipmen, as young adults, and understanding their own social identity. What am I allowed? What can I? What can't I do? It's a redefining of ourselves and our identity right now, especially for youth groups.
What are you looking at right now? What are you tracking right now? What do you look at every single day to understand where we are and where we're going?
I'm interested in how we bond with one another when we don't have that physical contact anymore. How do we maintain relationships? What are the things that we are going to take away as something we learned that's new? What values have we developed that are new? I think we will readjust, what it means to stay a distance, a certain distance away from people. Before it might have be seen as something negative, right? Now it's more of we're looking out for each other. So redefining symbolic behaviors and how that might stick. I'm very interested in that. But I'm also interested in how groups form through COVID and how social networking happens and how the idea of smaller groups and the strength and fortitude of small groups and sense of community thrive and are maintained throughout this period. I think that's very important and also very telling of the importance of social groups and social identity. I do think it's interesting, though, how certain things have been redefined. So this idea that I can't see your mouth, and yet I can still communicate with you. You might not give me a hug, but that's okay, right? Because we're just trying to be safe. Those redefining certain behaviors, I find that fascinating.
Clementine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, and you've actually given me more food for thought. I better get right on it in case you ask me any more questions.
I will definitely be asking you more questions in the future. This is Donna Cole. This has been the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.